Hi, everybody. We've had a little bit of difficulty this time, and there may be, if I'm correct, two ways of getting in.
No, don't. If people who are there, and people who aren't there, you're not talking to. So
Okay, so we'll miss some people because they're connected to something else. But people who are there and can see me are connected. So uh, uh, this is as complicated as the question that I'm going to try and tackle tonight. Because, well, not because, but in a kind of way, because we are complicated structures. And so are these machines, I'm afraid. So I'll just wait for a couple of seconds. People are popping in, and we'll start off with a question from Sonia Nigam from Ottawa. There are some other questions that maybe, if people are listening that sent in questions, and there are, I have to admit, not very large numbers, but nonetheless, thanks go out to people who have sent in questions. I'm going to try and talk about something in relationship to relationships. Not so simple, but unfortunately, one of the things that we could do eventually, I think we have a seminar coming up in July. We'll try and, if you can remind me, engage with interactions between people. If someone can set up a question somehow like that, and if not, maybe you can remind me that I should be talking about it. But here's a very difficult question from Sonia, and these difficult questions are have a flavor that is basically involved with all of our interactions with every single person. On an energy level, we transmit to each other all the time. On a very practical, physical personality level, we engage with each other in a kind of a different way, yet we are still transmitting to each other all the time with our intensity and our exposure to natural exposure to a cultivation of a personality that we are going to be using for the rest of our lives, at least to some degree. And that degree will depend on how much change occurs in your relationship with how you see other people, engage with life, respond to others, and respond to how you function internally and externally with and around others. So the question that Sonia comes up with is, can you talk about suffering within close relationships, family relationships, partner relationships, relationships with kids and partners? This question can be extended to an engagement with yourself and with friends and with not so friendly engagements, and the positions that you take in relationship to how that should be or could be in an idealistic frame or in a just plain normal frame where we interact with each other, and what that interaction might look like. Our dilemma with these things really basically is, in spite of our attempts to understand them, at best, they are partly understood, and conclusions then are jumped because we have learned to jump to conclusions. It has been a very important thing for us to do because the quickness of how you engage with others relative to how they're functioning and you're functioning uh, builds an image of what you cautiously believe unknowingly you should be in, how you should be involved with other people, how you believe how you should be involved with other people. Okay, that's a sketchy at best beginning because we're not talking about suffering yet. But remember, when you're dealing with things, that if you can remember, some of you can remember those images that we sometimes use where there's a male and a female, could be male, male, female, female, it just doesn't matter. And those chakras and how the energy is moving from them into you and how they affect you, in a way, is constructive pretty well all the time, unless you're using emotional intensity to negate others. Then it's not so constructive. However, when you're dealing with yourself and you notice yourself doing that, you could help yourself to be constructive for you. In other words, you notice intensity. You might even notice, although it's rare, that what center or chakra or Sephiroth may be activated by your intensity. Often it's a combination of emotion and base centers, root centers. If you are willful in any way, God forbid that should not happen, I suppose you could say, then the gonad center is functional as well. These centers are base structure centers. Without them, you would not be able to function. They're living, functional expressions of energy, which, of course, you are. Okay, that's kind of generalized in a kind of a way. And these centers, in particular, these base centers, can move in a direction relative to not personalization, but perceiving beyond the personality and including the personality. Yet, the energies that come out of these base centers are often used naturally, normally, for basically perception in a kind of sensing modality. You perceive or sense how another is. You sense those, you engage with those senses and make sense of them in the mind. After sensing them, you make sense of them in the mind according to how you normally have in the past. You can call it bias, but it's basically how you have done things and how you have learned to do them because you have been affected by others, whoever they may be, and they are showing you how you should be. They've been models for you. Added to this is what you make in your own mind. It's kind of a semi-fiction, but it's a make-up form. It's a personality form that is made up. Not negative. That's not a negative statement. That's an honest statement. You make up in your mind as time goes on and your experience has touched each other. Basically, your learning modalities, how you think others had been, and you sometimes miss some things and sometimes catch them. And then you shadow those things, you take them on. Much of that is unknown, but used. So they are kind of reflexive patterns because you appear to see that they work for others, therefore they will work for you. To terminate all of these, eradicate them, would be to eradicate a personality. This you're never going to do. And others will never do that either. But remember, in a kind of reflexive manner, your sensing mechanism that is being cultivated from inside the womb, early start. And you can look at science where the new science is telling us about the business of the ears being extremely important in a very short period of time of being in the womb, and how the form, a little extended stuff here, is even looks like an ear, or cultivated a bit like an ear. But I wouldn't say that that's very scientific. It just happens to look that way. But the whole system is started already. And you continue on with this all the way through. And those who have taught you have done the same thing. All right, now just a minute. One could say that you have a cultivated bias about anything and everything that you come in contact with, because it would be true. Culturally, nationally, wherever you have gained access to knowledge is maybe slightly different than other places. Maybe not. And you engage this way for the purpose of creating a system which will be relatively valuable. Idealistically, perfect in every way. But that's not real. Never has been real, never will be real. At these levels of engagement with life. But the idealism involved there is tremendously strong, based on the reflexes that have occurred and responses that have occurred in your upbringing. This is more right than that, even if it was never spoken. It would be acted upon verbally, intensely, internally, or in some way expressed, even by a look or a non-look, an elevation, a put down. All of these are symptomatic and real in relationship to the construction of a bias. There is no negation in these things. This is how you and I, whoever may be there, and I don't care who it is, have learned to engage in some form as a personality, considering very much so an aspect of idealism, whether it be ideally perfect or ideally imperfect, or a mixture of a whole bunch of stuff in between. And to learn how to find a balance on a conscious basis in this takes more than an intellectual sense of right or wrong, good or bad. It takes more than an engagement with a bias about what kind of emotional response an individual should have when you open your mouth or when they open their mouth and express in a certain way an idea that does not necessarily align with yours or does align with yours. It's not that we're not equipped to construct a system where we can watch and attempt to understand and make sense of something beyond our personality biases. It's just we're not trained to do so. And to begin to train to do so in the mid of part of life is not so simple. Train to do so in the teenage part of life, where you're looking to find a place and a position of relationship with yourself in the world, with all of those other folks who believe they have done just that and their system is better than any other system. We all have a piece of that in us. That also is very difficult, even to start there. In fact, we are all young in this, meaning this: the construction, in my opinion, this is an opinion, you have to think this through for yourself. The construction of a system that will allow you entertain the possibility that your bias is a beginning of a development of a personality rather than the end point of a maintenance or maintained very perfect, very valuable way of engaging. Here comes the word of suffering. Can you talk about suffering within close relationships, family relationships, partner relationships with kids and partners, and also with others, close friends, or distant people who are distant from people, other people? Their ideas aren't quite up to snuff according to us. This kind of thing. And in fact, if we could see that, we would see that that is a bias, but it's not necessarily perfect. At this point of reference, we suffer in a kind of a strange way, a kind of reflexive response to occur. It's not the same bias as we have. Therefore, that other person doesn't measure up somehow. This is an engagement with increased suffering for ourselves, and we don't know it. We put down ourselves as we put down others. In fact, something within us knows our biases are not real. However, until the day we know that consciously, we also know that our bias is more real than someone else's biases. Having a sense of humor right there might be the key. However, very interesting thing. I've always been fascinated with this idea. The concept of suffering is interesting because it has changed meanings. Many years ago, suffering meant allowing. When the Christian context is suffer the little children to come unto me. It would have been great in the 16th, 17th, 18th century had they changed that kind of way of speaking. Then we never would have had any idea. Other than we know we suffer when our close people that we care for and love speak harshly about our biases. And by the way, we do the same thing for them in our own way. Once again, may not be verbal, maybe something you do with your body, how you place your positioning, how valid your word is better than someone else's. We do this all the time. Take a look around you. Walk down the street in New York, Ottawa, anywhere, and you will find this same thing everywhere. Any country you might ever go to. If you can be helpful to someone, you're considered valuable. If you're not helpful to them in the way that they believe you need to be helpful, you're not valuable. Energy transmission is never considered unless you live within you at a level where you begin to understand that transmission is very helpful in relationship to a different purpose other than winning relative to your bias. So let's soften that down a little bit. You engage with other people, and they are brought up, partners, for example, differently than you are. And they believe their bias is more important than others. They are in love with their bias, the way they believe things should be. And they need to do that on these levels because they are at a level where they cannot anticipate the hurt that might occur if their bias was not listened to. And they were subjected to having to think in a different way than they know must be more right than anyone else's way of thinking. I know this sounds a little difficult to hear. Absolutely it is. And I think this is one of the reasons why it's so difficult for people to allow themselves to understand the level of love that each and every person has, to use love of the self to construct a form that there has to be a reiteration constantly that this is, they approve of themselves, therefore others need to approve of themselves in a particular way. And if they don't, then that other person isn't thought of as valuable as they might be relative to the bias that you've constructed. Now, if you look at this negatively, and I'm looking at this as to say, boy, we are still growing no matter what our age might be. And this is not an easy thing to do. But as you are growing internally, this begins to be something that you begin to be aware of little by little. And you attempt to be softer with it. Because in a kind of a way, you're learning how to love a difference in the way you personalize your engagement with the world. This is not so simple when you're actually doing it. Very simple to talk about, I suppose, if you can get all the words in order and speak them out and make them sound good. But when you're actually doing it, you run across an increase in perception because that's your focus. You begin to allow the idea that you're nervous and afraid, that the love you have with another person will not be there if you have a kind of constant disagreement with them all the time in relationship to a bias. Then you start slowly to understand that there are different angles of seeing what you encounter on a daily basis. Some can only see it from one point of view because there's a need there to protect that point of view. Otherwise, they will not be or have a sense of being able to survive. This is much too vulnerable. There's another thing too, in families especially. There is often a relationship with competition. Not because they get up in the morning and try to compete, but it's because of they need a slight different position and place to see the world from so that they can be valued as an individual separate from another. It sounds a little weird, but it's not weird. There is a sense of engagement with others where you believe you need to have something, see something from a different perspective. Otherwise, you'll not be considered of value. Trying this, for example, I don't have any interest in believing exactly the way you do, but I'm trying to understand what angle you're coming at this from. You don't speak those words necessarily because you may not be considered a very viable person if you talk like that. Maybe you would. Depends on the people that you're engaged with. You see, there's no perfect conclusions in these things, although the bias tells you it's perfect, or relatively so. Close enough. At the same time, each and every individual, not exactly, but have different energetic intensities operating through them. It's part of their learning process, this learning process. How much of a certain level of loving can I handle going through me? Honestly. So that others may be affected in a way that will be helpful to them in their capacity to handle that flow operating through them without interfering with it. My goodness. I know that sounds on the edge of our personality realities here. I know that. But we have constructed and learned how to function here the way we have, and the way we insist on reiterating its validity daily almost. Are you telling me you can't learn anything else? Am I telling me I can't learn anything else? Can I mix the two of them? Are they mixable? I think they are. Little by little. You do add things. You're not the same as you were when you were a teenager. You still have that teenager reflex in there, and you use it for purposes relative to your personality need, as it says, must do this because this will reassure me that I'm valuable and I'm right. Or if you've been brought up in a different way, I'm wrong, but I don't care. It's just the way I am, blah, 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 blah. This concept of suffering is really interesting. Anything that is outside the plus or minus values that we give ourselves, we can be 20% wrong. Or we might be okay with 10% more information that is slightly different than us. But at the same time, we have to make sure that we're exactly the way we think we are. Now, we don't sit and think about that. Although some sit and reassure themselves that if they maintain the way they have been, it's got them so far, it will help them to get farther, whatever farther was, whatever that ideal concept would be. So awareness becomes a very important thing. Can compassion, empathy for yourself become an important thing? If you have family members, are you able to be empathetic for them, whatever angle they're coming at? Because if they come at it from life from a particular angle and they reassert that angle, they will hurt because they're not able to get the kind of response that is necessary to maintain that angle of interaction with a family member. How about if they look at it from a slightly different angle and try to figure out where the other person's coming from? It's an old oyster. Unless you walk in the shoes of somebody else, you never understand what they're like. Yeah, right. Try that. And try it being honest with yourself. And you'll find the shoes won't quite fit because you don't know what the other person is like. To be honest, you don't. You know, it's difficult for you to know what you're like until you show up in a conversation with somebody else. One of the most fascinating things is often people talk and find out what they're really thinking, but they never ask the question, do you believe what you're thinking? It might be an important question to ask yourself. And do you believe the emotion that is drummed up to maintain how you think you need to be to keep that same angle of engagement that validates you in your mind, idealistically, so much? At some point in your wisdom, it will bother you because you'll begin to understand your relationship with you is already a loving one. And that angle of loving doesn't even work on these levels very well. But if you don't have it, it becomes very difficult. You suffer. So, what did I just say? Virtually, you could hear it this way. If you do not maintain how you are exactly, you will suffer as a personality. Well, here's another way to think of it. It is true that that may be true. However, if you are aware more of how you function, you may become considerate of other people. May, I said may. And begin to notice that you're a decent person, a loving person. Of yourself, the way you have attempted to remain. And as an adult, you're beginning to understand that that isn't always the best way to be. In the engagement with others, or in the engagement with yourself. I think this is the most difficult thing that anyone could ever attempt. But it is an honest thing. I think those higher levels, you need to think about this if you even consider that a viable thing, are very interested in those who can be honest with themselves. It's not related to what is right, wrong, good, or bad. It seems to be related directly to an individual caring enough for themselves to allow themselves to see how they're engaging in a gentle, balanced, and appropriate a manner as possible, meaning not harshly. That's not that loving, unless you love being harsh. And I don't believe that anyone at the core of them loves that. I think it happens to us, but I don't think that anyone loves that. You can be fooled into thinking of acting in a certain way. You get something. But that's not loving. Individually, if we encourage ourselves to remember that all of us hurt when our understanding is different than how we function, it causes a kind of pain. You're not willing to allow yourself to be kind to yourself, respectful. This happens in families all over the place because people are different and they have great fears and great wondrous levels of biases. In some families, competition is fierce. If you had 9 kids, competition would be fierce for the food on the table. But only if you were poor. But remember, all of those 9 kids still function because their parental background may be attempting desperately to have enough money to pay for food for 9 kids. Sounds a little weird, probably a very bad example. But here's the deal. Listen well, and you will hear the competition of children in adult bodies desperate to be recognized, valued, considered worthy of an ideal they may not even know they believe exists. This is normal in our world. This is not a negative thing. This is us growing. And you'll hear the chatter in yourself the same way. Don't be afraid of it. And it will make you vulnerable. But it'll also make you humble. Once again, you don't have to tell anybody. Because you're attempting to learn from you that there is space for others. They may not agree with you. And you'll not talk them into it because they are learning and growing in a way that relates to an ideal, something within their own personality that is valued. Relative to their process of growing and how they grew into the personality they have. This method of engaging is similar to yours, even if you are wonderfully able. And as time goes on, they may consider alternate ways of responding. And many do, and many don't. It's part of our particular species. Do the best you can. And that suffering level with understanding and sometimes with humor. You've probably said this to yourself. My God, I don't believe I said that, did that. Why did I do that? That doesn't even make any sense. It's like a 2-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 50-year-old, a 30-year-old, sorry. But it may help you to laugh a little and understand that perfection is not one of the things that we are. That's a fiction. I don't care who we are. It doesn't matter. So it's about seeing and attempting to have as much compassion or empathy, at least, for others, knowing, for example, that you do things that are a little imperfect from time to time. When you see others doing their imperfect from their relationship from time to time, with time to time. How are we doing? Okay. Look, as I said before, this is really difficult. And then Sonia comes up with a doozy. Sorry, Sonia. What is the relationship between one person's suffering and personal growth and the other person's suffering and personal growth? We grow through us. We understand through us. If something changes internally, there's a bit of a space there that occurs. And you see something inside yourself that's not familiar. Even if it's just a moment, just a second or two. Say, oh, I normally do this. Why am I doing this instead? That second, that or two, whatever, allows you to understand that there may be something different if you're doing something different that may be helpful. So you broaden out your need to remain exactly critically the same. Otherwise, you will lose every sense of value that you have. It's just not as real as what you believe it is. Nor can it ever be. So we'll continue to grow. Once again, pay attention, learn, and you'll find little subtle things occurring inside of you where you're actually learning from yourself. And it's as if There's an idea mentally, and a response emotionally, a physical interaction, or a moment, a second where you think, I don't want to act like this anymore. If it's sincere, you'll begin to see more often how you do act like the thing that you don't want to act like. It's because an internalization of loving, from my perspective, that relates to you and your relationship with that deep internal love that is always there, or expression that is there in relationship to a higher state. I don't have a perfect thing to call it. You may. I'm not put off by anything that you might call it, because there's no perfect thing to call it. And we've called it many things. But it's there. And it engages in love with our way of thinking we need to be over and over and over again to see whether this makes any sense to us. It appears as if it's trying to promote learning inside of ourselves. Related to Lee's question at one point about learning and love. It promotes us learning beyond our negotiated personality structure over the years from the time of our being in the womb. Trying to learn how to pace our understanding, our relationship with maintenance related to our personalities, and how strongly we reserve the right to believe there's only one way to see things. But you should also reserve the right to change your mind at any given moment. You're not held in any position except by your love of that position, because it serves you in a kind of ideal that you believe must be maintained until you don't, till it's no longer interesting as much as it used to be to you. Perhaps that may make some sense. Perhaps not. In any event, I wish you well. It's about 10 minutes to 8, and I think we're going to meditate now, because to start on something else will take us a little farther. I need to say one more thing. I'm sorry, I missed this, Sonia. Is there a cosmic coordination of this suffering in any way, or is each person's experience separate? Each person's experience may be separate, but it's not separate in the sense that it's individually separate. That rather, it is individually separate, but it is the same relationship with fear of not being respected or valued if you don't act some other way. We have a lot to say in our world about how other people should be. If you pay close attention to that, you will start seeing things within yourself that are similar to those that you are putting down. Finding where that is in you is not so simple, because you will reject that concept fast to assure yourself that you're okay. but you don't have to reject it. You're okay right from the beginning. Life is a very precious thing because it has many levels and many levels of engagement with higher states. And we are a grouping of a species that has its focus on the physical personality, inclusive of the mind, inclusive of the emotional, and inclusive, of course, of the physical renderings of what we believe we need to be at any given moment, whether you're standing in front of a mirror or protecting your own personal way of seeing things or engaging intellectually with a concept that you've never considered before, or responding in a reaction that comes out of nowhere for the purpose of you being comforted by you, battling to maintain the same relationship as you consider you may have had, or battling to maintain a sense of position and place, or just feeling comfortable within yourself. I wish everyone well. And we're going to meditate. We'll have some music, and we'll do that for roughly about 50 minutes to an hour. Take care, everybody. Now we'll just begin to do the balancing and the grounding on your own. And take care. Have a good evening.